Okay, let's see. Now it's Toyota. Hi, parts department, please. Thank you. Hi. Yeah, 2007 Tacoma. Yes, the big engine. And what's the price on a replacement throttle linkage spring? Okay, I'll wait till you pull it up. Now I can do that myself, right? Yep, okay. And it needs a new retention clip. You can't use the old one. Oh, they changed it out. Okay. So that's what, 3180? Okay, you got them in stock. All right, thanks a lot. I'll be right down. Let's see, true value. Francois, it's your fishing buddy. Yeah, did you pull your bob house off yet? Yeah, I know. This is going on too long. Anyway, I need to replace, remember you keyed out, you keyed alike all those Slade locks for me back 15 years ago? Yeah, well, I think it's time probably to change the springs and all those locks. What do you mean? No? Yeah, but don't they get fatigued and the little detents don't work anymore, and if it's, if they're not reliable, I might get locked out in some cold night or something like that. They're not going to wear out. They never wear out. Yeah, but I mean, how many hundreds of times do those things, they don't wear out? No, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to argue. Okay. Take care, Frank. Have a good day and don't eat too many donuts today, okay? Bye-bye. Isn't it time that you change out your 1911 spring? That's what everybody's being told these days, is you gotta, after all, you can't be too careful. This is your life out there, you're going out into the wild world, and you got a gun that's going to save your life someday. You got to replace that on occasion, otherwise that thing could malfunction, and you could die. Well, you drove down the road probably for the last umpteen years, maybe for the last 8 or 10 or 15 years, pumping your throttle up and down, and you're careening along down the highway at 65, 75 miles an hour. That's a pretty deadly sport if if your throttle somehow doesn't work anymore because the linkage spring doesn't retract. There's so many things out there that we rely upon that have springs that are in our daily lives, and we don't concern ourselves with it. But somehow or another, it's become very popular, it's become vogue to tell people, and to get away with telling people, to lie to people, to tell them that this spring is somehow different and that it's not going to be safe and will fail on you. Let me show you something. I've got a box here. This is just for Ruger handgun alone. I've got different boxes of these things. This one here has some replacement hammers. I've got hammer springs, and all these hammer springs, they all have pre-mounted. The struts are pre-mounted on them. I got, I don't know, maybe a dozen of those or something. I've got rebound springs. I've got all kinds of rebound springs in here. I got some cylinder springs. I don't go through too many of those, very, very few. But the reason why I have those springs and the only reason, is not because they wear out or that they're expected to wear out or anything like that. They wear out because somebody decides that they're going to improve the product that was sold to them or that they were issued, and they're going to clip off a coil or two of the hammer spring, and then they start getting misfires. Or maybe they clip off a coil on the rebound spring for their trigger, and their trigger doesn't return back to battery, and it cramps up and the gun doesn't function anymore. We have so many different springs, and the only reason why I ever replaced them was because of owner manipulation. Somebody did something they weren't supposed to do. Remington supplies us with some, replacement magazine tube springs for like the 870s that we had and everything. So these were to replace a spring that somebody had accidentally bent over or crimped or, somehow or another destroyed by not being careful with the gun when they were maintaining it. But springs always are replaced because they fail to function after somebody has messed around with them. Somebody has broken the spring or clipped the spring, bent the spring or something like that. But they don't fail any more than the springs underneath your suspension of your car fail. If you consider how many thousands of times the springs in your suspension flex as you going down the road, just driving down to get half a gallon of milk, those springs are flexing more times than you're ever going to pull the trigger on your 1911 handgun. And they flex under varying loads, and they always return back to battery, you might call it. They always continue to work. Once in a while, somebody will drive into a deep pothole and blow out a spring on a car or a truck or something like that. That's a very rare thing. They'll bust a shackle off or something. But we go through our entire life with springs that we manipulate all the time. Light switch springs, the pull chain on the light that's in your basement over your workbench. You have springs galore in your car, and you have springs. Every time you turn around, you've got springs. Your fishing reel is loaded with springs. You've got clocks that work continuously that are loaded with springs. Springs are something that are part of our daily life, and there's no reason to single out this particular spring as being weaker or somehow prone to failure over any other spring. That's a ruse that has been placed upon us by an industry that makes money selling springs. There is a big industry out there. There's a little cottage market out there that's not so small at all that will sell you any spring that you desire to buy from them. Let me talk about, first of all, so I want to categorically say that the replacement of springs for preventative maintenance is absolutely unnecessary. You're preventing absolutely nothing. There's nothing special about the spring that you're putting in the gun that's going to be any better than the spring that you replaced. Now, what about the people who will write to me and tell me, oh yeah, but when I got a new spring for my 1911 and it was this much longer than this one, it proves that this one was weakening. No, that's a built-in compression factor. The manufacturer knows that the gun is going to the spring is going to compress to some degree. It's going to stay there. It's not going to continue to compress until it's only an inch long. That is not a weak spring, and it's not a sign. It's not a harbinger of disaster ahead if you didn't replace it. It's a known factor. That spring is going to compress to a certain amount after it's been cycled and after it's been compressed in the firearm. That's a known compression factor. That occurs with quite a lot of springs out there. So you don't need to replace them as a preventative maintenance. And if anybody who tells you that you need to replace springs as a preventative maintenance, well, you better get at it with your car, because there's a lot of springs in there that are prone to failure if that's your train of thought. And no more than the springs in that lock that I was doing that little act with. You don't need to replace any kind of spring. Now, what about changing out springs and improving them? Well, I'm telling you, as an armorer who's been an armorer since 1975 for Smith & Wesson, and Ruger since 1983, Remington since 1987, you know, longer than most of you have been around probably. And the only springs that we ever replaced as an armorer were the ones that were broken by somebody, or destroyed by somebody by cutting them off with wire cutters, that sort of thing. We never had to replace them. As far as changing them out to a different compression factor and to reduce the load on the part, well, I can tell you that's fool's folly. If you're of a mind that you want to have a gun that will protect you in a deadly situation, that's the last thing you want to do, because all these springs have been carefully computed to always function no matter what, under any circumstances. And reducing the compression on some of those springs, or the expansion, there's different types. There's tension springs, torsion springs, and compression springs. So changing them out to be a different ratio than they originally were is really asking for trouble. Of all the guns that I've ever had to repair in my life, you know, most of the guns were simply maintenance. You know, I took them apart, I went through them and, you know, cleaned them out, made sure that they were functioning very well, and gave them back to the officer. When I had to replace springs and replace components, it was always because of the manipulation factor. It was always because somebody did something which was categorically not recommended by the factory and certainly not authorized by our department. So that was the story on that. You're on your own when you replace springs. When you go to a company and you get a so-called spring kit, you know, to replace out the factory springs, you're on your own. I guarantee you that you're going to have problems with that if you put in different ammo, because, you know, those things are operating on the borderline of reliability. That's the way those companies worked it. They kept on manipulating those springs down to the point where they failed to function, and then they increased the tension on them until they did function. Well, that's not my idea of a reliable firearm. A reliable firearm, you know, it can have another half or 3/4 of a pound trigger pull, and it's going to save my life. You take off that half or 3/4 of a pound of trigger pull just to make this delightful trigger squeeze, and, you know, that could be the end of your life someday when that gun doesn't go off. So don't mess around with springs. What about the fatigue factor of magazine springs? Well, it's one and the same thing. Magazine springs are designed to work as they're intended from the beginning and continue to work virtually forever. There are some manufacturers out there that are big manufacturers out there that are quite willing to tell you that, you know, every so often your department should go through their entire inventory and change out all their springs. Well, that's pretty good business, you know, because if you got a department with say 100 officers, you know, each has sidearms, and you've got, you know, times three for the magazines that they carry on their belt. You know, you got a bunch of magazine springs, each at about, you know, $6.95 a piece or something, and that's pretty good business. So if you can get away with it, you know, I don't care what your logo is on the back of your shooting vest or whatever. That's a bunch of BS. Magazine springs don't become fatigued because they've been compressed for a long time. That's a lie. They do not. There have been in firearms history, there have been a few occasions where springs were not correctly made and they suffered fatigue when they were, you know, the magazines were loaded for a long time, and then they failed to feed rounds up to the breech. But those are notable exceptions. They're not the rule, and that was simply because manufacturer didn't get the tempering correct in a particular lot of springs. You don't have to expect that to happen. When I was in Vietnam, you know, there was a wives' tale that went around that, you know, don't load your magazines with more than 18 rounds because otherwise they would start to break down and fail. No, You could load them with 20 rounds in the 1960s, just as you can load them with 20 rounds in the 1990s and the 2020s. You're always going to be able to load a 20-round magazine with 20 rounds and a 30-round magazine with 30 rounds. Now, if you buy some magazine that is not, OEM, if it's not a factory magazine, again, you're on your own. You have to go to the source that is reliable. You have to have somebody who has a reputation for reliability. And there are aftermarket companies out there that make springs other than I should say magazines, other than the factory originals, that work just fine. They're beautiful. Magpul, for instance, makes wonderful magazines. And they have no issues. But there are companies out there that don't know what they're doing and make sketchy magazines. So let me just say categorically, you should never change a spring, for preventative maintenance. If it's somehow or another, if it failed, you change it. If it hasn't failed, you don't change it. Don't change your springs to improve the action or improve the cycling of your gun. Don't modify your springs to improve the functioning or cycling of your gun. That's what I'm telling you as an armorer who has vast experience with, failures, gun failures. Gun failures were almost categorically had to do with over lubrication or manipulation of a gun by somebody. So that's all I have to say. Benny, here's my boy. And Benny's still doing really good. He's doing awesome. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Tell all your friends about us. And God bless.